Here we have the Eggtimer Telemetry Module. It's used as an addition to their flight computers. You plug it in and it sends telemetry down to your receiver. Let's open it up, take a look, see what we have. Let's take a look at what comes inside the telemetry module. We have our parts list. We have some heat shrink tubing. We have a little brass rod. Have a couple circuit boards with a couple components. We have some solder and another DuPont cable. And that is the contents of the telemetry module. I'll begin with a 3cc syringe filled with some solder paste using a 20 gauge applicator. I will apply solder paste for the pads for the resistor and diode. I'll begin by placing resistor 331, followed by the diode, making sure to align the white marks on the diode and the silkscreen. And then I grab my hot air, set to a low speed, and set to a temperature of 404 degrees Fahrenheit, and slowly heat up the board to melt the solder. Now I flip the board around to get access to the pads for the RF module. Now I apply solder to the top right surface mount pad. That way I can bring the module in, heat up that solder, and it'll tack the RF module in place, holding it steady while I solder the other pads. I did not like how rough and jagged the solder was looking, so I applied a little bit of flux, and I will touch it up with the iron and watch how the solder magically smooths out. Now I grab the provided cable and use my flush side cutters to cut off one of the connectors. I then strip the 3 wires and I put them into the appropriate holes in the circuit board from the top and solder from the back. I now go to the other end of the connector and use a small flathead screwdriver to lift up on the locking tabs and pull out each of the conductors individually. I now take the provided heat shrink and cut it to the length of the metal connector. I cut 3 of these sections. I now use my hot air to shrink the heat shrink, securing it in place. I take the included rod and place a small 90-degree bend in the end of it, using some needle nose pliers. I then place the bend of the brass rod into the hole in the PCB next to the output of the RF module. I then solder the brass rod in place. I ensure that I also soldered the pad of the RF module. As you can see, I applied too much solder when trying to solder the pad, so I will use some solder wick to remove the excess solder. And as you can see, it cleans everything up perfectly. Just a quick touch up, and a little solder for the ground pad. Now I place the brass rod on a ruler measuring out 80 millimeters and cut to length with my flush side cutters. Now I take more of the included heat shrink and cut it to the length of the brass rod. And then I use my heat gun to shrink it in place. And that is the assembly of the Eggtimer Telemetry Module. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.